Okay, so I guess we wanted to briefly start this presentation with a bit of background, just because we know that we've got a lot of externals on today, so not everyone would have the, I guess, the context about the talk that Ron's about to mostly deliver. So I'll just quickly talk about, I guess, the problem that we're solving and talk a little bit more about our history and purpose, just to try and get us all on the same page. And then hopefully Ron will get his presentation going, which looks like it's looking promising there. And he can take you through the rest of the talk. Cool. So first things first, if you go to the next page, Ron, we've got a Slido link that you can all get to. So if you want to ask any questions, feel free to head to that link, punch in the event code 82934. And at the end of the session, we'll take some questions and we'll do our best to answer as much as we can. I believe there might be a follow-up session later in the week as well, where we'll try and answer any ones that weren't, or I guess open up for further questions. Cool. So if you head to the next slide, Ron. So I guess quickly talking about the problem space we're working in. So as you can see there, look, we know integration testing is hard. It's really hard, and we think most companies, we believe most companies are releasing and testing software. We think they could do a lot better. And I guess our job is we want to change that. And so our vision really is to transform the way teams test and release those distributed systems. And Pactflow, the tool that we're going to talk about today in our startup, that's a tool that's built on top of Pact, and it's making that a lot easier to do. Pardon me, to do at scale. Next slide, Ron. So just a little bit about our journey to where we got to where we are now. So back in 2013, Ron, Beth, and a few others built a tool called Pact. In fact, it wasn't even called Pact at this point. They were doing sort of what was microservices project before that was even a term, out at realestate.com.au, which is property classifieds website in Australia. I think it's our biggest one. And they built this really powerful tool that helped solve this painful problem. Eventually, I think Ron open sourced it, and it turned out that people really thought that was useful. So in 2014, Pact kind of was open sourced. It was expanded upon to work with Java and JVM-based services. I think Scala was the initial version. And I think when microservices started to become a thing, that really started driving adoption of the tool Pact. Fast forward to sort of 2015, 2016, we just saw this huge trajectory where the tool was just really gaining in popularity. There was a lot more languages coming into support. And now I think there's about 10 or 12 languages or something that we support. Window, we really saw this huge adoption curve, and we thought during that phase, there's probably something here, and we're really enjoying doing this. We really love solving this problem. How can we do this as a full-time job? And Deers have been really supportive of us in working on the open source, but obviously it's a commercial business focused on consulting, and so we sort of did this, mostly in our part-time and also some paid work through Deers. But we thought, is there a way we can create a vehicle to spend more time working on open source, solving bigger problems, and also creating a viable way of doing that? And that was when we thought maybe there's a way we can do this through some kind of hosted offering. And so in December of 2016, we launched the MVP, or I guess an MVP around the hosted Pact Broker. And the broker, without going into too much detail, it's kind of at the center of this initiative. It's a collaboration tool that brings all this stuff together. We don't really need to get to the details of the tool today because it's more about, I guess, the business. But we launched a hosted offering there, and it turned out that people actually really wanted that. It really helped them adopt the tool, adopt the processes, and get going more quickly. And I think we had about 1,000 signups in that sort of 1.5 to 2 year period. And through that process, we got a lot of feedback. We got a lot of comments from people saying, "Can you please just make this better? We want to give you money. We want to see you solve more problems." And so we found that by the time we got to sort of 2019, that was a time to turn it into a real product, to really launch it. And that was when we launched Pactflow last year. And so you can think of Pactflow as really just a hardened, improved version of the current open source Pact Broker, with a bunch of tools, creature comforts, and enhanced tools just to make it easier to work at scale. And I guess fast forward to 2020, we're now sort of wanting to build this sustainable growing business. We've got about 500 signups so far, including those ones from before. We're starting to solve some bigger problems. We're working in the open source community, and our product's really starting to evolve. So I don't want to talk too much because that's what Ron's going to take us through, but that's a little bit about our history. And I guess we're pretty excited about what the future's holding for us. So Ron, I'm now going to pass over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Matt. Okay. Yeah, just before we get into that, for those joining later, here's the Slido code. So anyone who wants questions answered, just pop a question in there. And we're going to have a Q&A session at the end with Matt, me, and Beth, answering any questions, I guess, that pique our interest. Okay, so yeah, as Matt said, we set out on this journey to create a hosted version of the Pact Broker. And we thought what we'd do it is just to do it at a price point just below the cost of self-hosting it. And that seemed like a really good idea to us. And of course, this is one of the big mistakes we made. So this talk is all about the lessons that we learned upon this in this journey. So I'll go through a couple of these mistakes we made and some of the the solutions that we found along the way. So now, what was the problem with this initial idea was the price point just below the cost of self-hosting. It seemed to us that would be the the best way of doing it, because you could host the broker yourself. So why would you pay more for somebody else to host it when you could host it for cheaper? And it was one of our ideas that we had to set our price point. And like I said, that's one of the mistakes we made on our journey. We also set out to, as our customers would be small businesses and startups, we didn't think big enterprises would want to use a self-hosted solution. More smaller businesses and startups would be much more capable of doing this. This was another thing we got wrong. It turns out that large organizations actually find it a lot easier to get a credit card to pay for like a SaaS product than it is to like provision a virtual machine. I know I worked at a telco where it would take up to about 6 months when you request a virtual machine to once it finally gets provisioned. So getting your manager or whoever controls the budget to just provide their credit card is obviously a lot easier. We were focused on tools for developers. We thought this was, tools built by developers for developers. This would be our target market. These developers would be working in small businesses and startups. And this is another thing we kind of got wrong. Well, kind of. A lot of our core sort of users actually testers. It's a contract testing tool, and that makes sense in hindsight. But in the beginning, we thought we'd be, creating software for software developers, not testers. Another thing that I always thought, if you want to create a viable SaaS product, the most important thing is to actually have a good product at the base, because obviously the whole thing about it is the product. And it's another thing we got wrong. We also started out saying, well, let's ask our users and our customers what they want, because if we know what they want, we know what to build. And this is also one of the big mistakes that you can make. And we made that mistake too. So that essentially is you shouldn't really just ask your customers what they want, because a lot of the times, us as human beings, we don't really know what we want. We know what we don't want, and we know what won't work for us. But what you've got to do is talk to your users and basically build a product that addresses their problems. And that's kind of what a good SaaS product sort of would be. Another good way to evaluate engagement is to use online surveys. Online surveys is used a lot. I actually just got a survey in the post today with my local council wanting to, sort of ask people about, the current year. And we thought, this was a good way for us to work out what our users want, is we can just give them a survey. And you've got to be very careful with surveys as well. This is another thing we got wrong, because there's only a particular segment of people that will actually fill out your survey. So you're actually skewing your results. You're not addressing all your customers, but only a subset of them. And you can now make product decisions only on a subset. And the last thing, of course, is a startup. I really didn't really have much idea about what a startup is, apart from a company that's starting up. And I thought that, everybody wants to work for a startup. Their startups have, a lot more ability to, pivot and to make changes, and they can be more dynamic. But I didn't really think what that really entails. And of course, that's also wrong. So, yeah, those are all the mistakes we made when we first set out. One of the biggest ones is pricing. Pricing is always very difficult to do for any product, I think, and people spend a lot of time, a lot of research to work out, how to set their pricing. So when we started out on this journey, what Matt actually did, and in hindsight, that was probably one of the best things that he did, was he got us to join the YC Startup School. So we basically joined their program. It was I think it was a 10-week course. Every week they have some lectures, and you basically talk to a lot of other people who are in the program. Now, what the Y Combinator Startup School, basically, their business, the YC business, is they're about connecting early stage startups with venture capitalists. So they realized that a lot of startups didn't have the opportunity to meet the VCs, who were basically, majority of them are in Silicon Valley. So unless you move to Silicon Valley and sort of to meet these people, it would be very difficult to basically get funding. And they realized that there's a business opportunity. So that's their business, is about basically connecting these startups. And now since 2005, they've funded about over 2,000 startups. And there's actually, if you look at the list of logos of some of the more popular ones, you'll see some really well-known brands like Airbnb, Stripe, Docker, PagerDuty. So they've got some really influential brands in there that have gone through their whole program. Now, the interesting thing is that I think it was Kevin Hale was one of the guys talking about pricing when we were in that program, and he basically said of those 2,500 startups that have gone through that program, every single one had set their price too low. He hadn't met a single startup that had set their price correctly. Yeah, here's are the sort of the main problems that he mentioned when we were doing the course of the mistakes that startups make. They set their prices too low. They underestimate their costs. They don't understand what the actual value is, and they focus on their own customers. Now, we got one of those right. We understood our costs quite well, and we ran quite a lean sort of venture from the beginning. So we at least got 1 out of 4, but the other 3 we got a bit wrong. Now, if you look at our sort of the pricing when we set out, so we were looking at that the idea is to make it just a bit cheaper than it would cost to self-host it. And I think we worked out that self-hosting, if you had to use say Amazon, AWS, you'll probably spend about maybe $40 to $50 a month to host the database and the application server. So we thought, okay, let's set our price just a bit lower than that, and we created 2 basically plans. We had a team plan for 5 users, set it at $29 a month, and a team 10 at $49. And then also we had this idea of a business plan for bigger businesses, but we had no idea what that price should be. Now, since going through the startups school and doing a lot of pricing changes, and I've basically worked out that there's really 3 components to the price. So everyone seems to focus on the actual monetary value, which is the amount. It's dollars or pounds or euros or yen or whatever currency you're working in. But there's 2 other components to the price as well. So obviously the cost is the main one that everyone focuses on. Now, when you deal with a product and a price, is also quality comes into play. Products with a higher quality are expected to be a higher price. And if you get in a really low price, a lot of the time there's a suspicion, people think that it's a low price, so therefore it must be a lower quality. Now, this is kind of the idea why Mercedes and BMWs are a lot more expensive than Toyotas and Hondas. But there's also a third component to prices, and that's kind of the value. This is the value you get for purchasing that product at that price. And And the problem is value is a perceived thing, and it's not really something that you can easily measure. And the value that someone gets can be made up of a whole lot of different things. It could be the time that they saved by using this product. It could be the pain point they address. It could be a convenience factor. There's a whole bunch of different factors, and it's a function of all these things to determine the value. So when you're doing pricing, you've got to kind of consider all these three different things. So this is one of the slides that I actually stole from Kevin Hale's talk. And when he was talking about pricing for startups, he was kind of said there's these 4 different quadrants. Now there's the quadrant of death that you need to avoid. And that's where you have a product that's got very high complexity and you set a very low price. So that will never avoid that. You need to avoid that. The other 3 quadrants are kind of where you need to set your pricing. So if you have low complexity and low price, you're kind of in the self-service quadrant, and you can kind of go for less than, it will be $2,000. It's probably $2,000 US dollars a year, and you can sort of target your price at that. High price kind of gets divided into low complexity and high complexity. So low complexity, you kind of have an example of maybe transactional businesses where you're maybe in the 2,000 to 10,000 US dollars a year price range. And then the enterprise is where you have to be above 25,000 because the time it takes just to invest in these sales can just have a lot of cost. So Kevin Held, when he sort of looks at the pricing when the startups, when they join their course, he basically has this 25-10 rule. So the idea is that the 10 times is what the value that you want to get, and that's the value portion. So the idea, you're trying to get to a price where the people who purchase your product, they get an estimated 10 times value. Now the problem is the value is going to be different for everyone. So maybe on average, you've got to look at, so if you spend $10 on a product, you should be expecting to get about $100 of value, whatever that means. So he recommended what you should do is just start increasing your price at 5% at a time until you lose 20% of your customers. So 20% of new customers start dropping off, and then you know to back off a little bit, and that's probably a good price point because that's set where the estimated value is about 10 times. So after going through all of this, we were like, oh, wow, yeah, our prices are really low. And so we looked at the prices and we thought, well, there's not much difference between the Team 5 and the Team 10. They have the same functionality. You just get more users on the Team 10. So we actually dropped the Team 5 off and we just doubled the price of the Team 10 to just under $100 per month. And then we introduced our business tier where we added more sort of enterprise features like single sign-on, SAML, audit logging, things like that, which big companies would probably be more interested in. And then we set the price there at just under $250 per month. We then kind of looked at the sort of the business. We changed the pricing a bit more after that. We created a Team 25 at the 250, and then we moved the business 25 to just under 500. Seems like the $249 seems to be the one that resonates the most, and that seems to be maybe be a good price point. We've got a few customers at that level, so that might be the good place to go. Unfortunately, we can't do the whole 25-10 process because we don't have thousands of customers, so we won't really know when we started losing 20% of our customers. But it seems that these price points have resonated well as our current customer base has. Now, this is one of the interesting things when it comes to pricing is that actually if you lower your price, you actually diminish your perceived value and you can actually harm your brand. Sometimes it's actually better to actually increase your price. And even if people can't afford it, they won't sign up for your product. The value that they perceive, they actually will think, well, that must be a good product because it has a high price. And maybe one day in the future when they can afford it, they'll actually come back to it because they'll remember it as maybe a better product. Now, this is kind of the rule that we kind of use when we try to set our pricing. And basically, so the MRR is your monthly recurring revenue. So we were looking at how can we get an MRR that's just more than our operational costs and a required runway. Now, A runway is a lot of startups use this as a technique, because with a startup, you normally have an investment in the beginning. You get a big bucket of money. And then you've got your basically your cash burn rate. It's the amount of money you're spending per day or per week or per month. So that money is only going to last a certain amount of time, and that's your runway. So you might have a 3-month or a 6-month or a 1-year runway. So I think the idea here is to try to get the best MRR you can that's above what your operating costs are, because obviously you need the money to operate the business, and you need a runway for when things are not as good, that you might not get as a lot of signups. Like Christmas time might be a lot of companies will shut down in the Europe and the US. So that's kind of where we aimed at, and I think we've got to a point now where we're quite happy with our pricing. And the other thing I learned all about is a sales funnel. Now, this is a typical sales funnel. This is one I stole off the internet, because that seems what the internet's there for, is stealing other people's work. And so a sales funnel is basically, it's a technique of working out the phases your customers go through. So this would be from when they first get awareness of your product, they get interest, they have some consideration, they have an intent to use it, they evaluate your product, and then they'll probably move to purchase. Now, a sales funnel is you can think of it as like a very leaky bucket. And at every level, a whole bunch of people will actually fall off. So you may get awareness would be people that actually just end up going onto your website. To the bottom is the people that actually purchase your product. Now, this is really important because obviously setting your price would impact the number of people that purchase. But it's also really important just for the awareness and just building your funnel out. Now, this is the YC startup school had it as one of their slides. I've also now stolen, but just showing the indicative percentages of dropout for those different levels. So you might get 100% of your visitors coming to your website, but of those 100%, maybe on average, only 10% will actually sign up for a trial. And of those, probably only 7% will actually log in. And of those, only 5% will actually become active users. And then it even drops down to, you might only get 1% will actually become paying users, and 1/3% would actually stay on as paying users after a period of time. So you can see, typically with SaaS products, it can be a very leaky bucket. Here's basically where, so a lot of SaaS products are all about growth, and this is basically where the growth is of the business comes about. It's basically the conversion, which is the number of people that you can convert to paid from going through that sales funnel to the number of people that you actually lose through churn, customer churn. Now, there's a couple of different techniques you can use to improve your sales pipeline. Unfortunately, we've got a very long pipeline in that it takes a very long time for someone who started using Pact open source tooling to eventually become Pactflow customers and paying Pactflow customers. But one of the things you can do is you can widen the top. Now, what that means is basically spreading the net as far and as wide as possible to get as many people coming into your website. Now, remember in the beginning, I said that we came along this idea that you had to have a viable SaaS product. You need to have a good product as a base. Well, it's very sad in my point of view that the most important thing for a SaaS product is probably marketing. It's all marketing. It was actually interesting to hear while we were doing the startup school that they're talking about Pebble, the Pebble smartwatch. When they started out, they wanted to gauge the market, and of course, they couldn't just go build some smartwatches. That's a very costly exercise, but they wanted to actually work out if people were interested in purchasing smartwatches. So they built a marketing website, which actually had a checkout process where you actually entered credit card details. And at the end, they had a screen that said, well, thank you for your interest. We will let you know when the product becomes available. So they actually built a whole marketing website without even having a product. The other thing you can do is obviously reduce the height of your sales pipeline. So for this, I don't think we'll be able to do this because it takes a very long time for people to evaluate. They need to basically go through 2 cycles. They need to evaluate Pact as a process, get it adopted in their organization, and then evaluate Pactflow as a viable product to host their broker. So you can almost think that for us, customers would go through this, maybe the first 5 phases of the sales panel twice. So they'll kind of go through awareness, interest, consideration, intent, and evaluation for Pact, and then they do it all again for Pactflow until they eventually get to purchase. Obviously, the other thing you can do is increase conversion, and this is what a lot of people focus on. So this is increasing the number of people who come to your website to eventually become paying customers. We've been focusing on conversion quite a bit. Now, here's typical conversion rates. Remember the old shareware software from, I think, the early 2000s? You're looking at about 0.5% of people who actually convert the shareware to paid. So it's really low. Casual download games, you're looking at about 2%. Freemium SaaS, which is where Pactflow falls in, you're kind of in the range of about 1.5 to about 5%. But overall, probably around 3%. I think initially we had a growth hacker helping us who worked out that we were maybe around 3.5. That may have changed. We haven't really looked at the figures for a while now, but yeah, we're kind of in that target range. But there are different products that actually do better than this, and it was really interesting for me to learn. I never actually really thought about it. So if you look at something like Flickr, they do about 5 to 10%. Of course, Adult Friend Finder, you'll get about 10 to 22%. Like sex sells, so obviously a lot more people going to these sites would convert. But this was really interesting when you got examples of like Club Penguin and Puzzle Pirates, where they actually get like 22 or 25%. So these are basically sites where they're addressing the pain point of parents have to deal with children. So products where you can address a pain point or convenience, they convert with a lot higher rates than other type of products. And of course, the big daddy of conversions is TurboTax Online. Basically, nobody goes to TurboTax to find out about it. Do they go there to purchase? So that was really eye-opening for me. So yeah, Kevin Hale kind of came up with this concept, and our growth hacker, he called it the aha moment. So the idea is you have this moment where people who are evaluating your product, they get to this point, this magic moment when they go, aha, this is the product that I've always wanted my whole life. And what he's trying to say here is that what you're trying to do is get the distance between your sign up button and that sort of moment to be zero. So now for us, this is very difficult because people have to go through a very long process to get to that point. We'd like to have, as you go, using Pact and Pactflow is awesome. I really needed to have the sign up button right in front of them at that point. Now, the other thing you can do is strengthen the bottom, and this kind of appeals to me more than the other things because I'm not a salesperson, and this is more about retention of customers. I like the idea of a really good, sort of product is where customers like to stay with you because they really like your product. And so we've been looking at how to, what you can do to retain customers. So here's an example of basically what a good product looks like from a not so good one. And for me, it was quite a good learning point to notice that even the good products lose a lot of customers in the beginning. So losing customers is normal. But the difference is then here you can see in later weeks, they actually stop losing customers and retain the majority of them, maybe 50% over a long period of time, where a bad product will just continuously lose customers. So we think we're okay in this regard. We haven't lost too many customers. Unfortunately, in the current economical climate, we're expecting to lose a few. But we think we might have a good product that people hopefully will want to stay with us with. Now, here's an example of a really great product, and it's probably one everyone who's a software developer will know. So basically they have 80% retention after 1 month, but they still have 30% after 5 years. So for me, 30%, I would thought that would be a really bad retention, but turns out that if you still got 30% of your customers after 5 years, you're doing well. So allegedly, this is GitHub, and GitHub is a very sticky product. Once you've got it integrated into your build pipelines, it's very difficult to switch to a different CI server. There's a lot of work involved. Now here's different things you can do from the startup school. Sort of examples of things you can do to change those different aspects. So looking at acquisition, you might do something like add more logos onto your website. So these are well-known brands who have signed up to your product. You put them on your website. And a 1% increase in acquisition, you probably get about a 3% increase in your revenue. But if you look at retention, this is where focusing on keeping customers. If you look at a 1% increase in retention, actually that's nearly a 7% increase in revenue. But of course, monetization is the big one. The more dollars you get per customer, a 1% increase in your pricing can result in about a 12% increase in revenue. Now, when it comes to sort of your sales funnel and your pricing, everyone talks about product market fit, and that kind of drives your retention and your acquisition. Now, we didn't have no idea what product market fit was when we started on this journey. And even, going through the startup school, everyone was talking about product market fit, but nobody could tell us what exactly it is. We had no idea. Everyone just said it's either something you have or you don't. And if you have it, you'll be so busy running your business that you won't have time to do anything else, which was great because that still doesn't tell us, exactly what the hell it is. So I had to do quite a bit of research, speak to a few people, listen to some talks to try to work out what they actually mean by product market fit. And it kind of came up with, it's probably the degree to which a product satisfies a strong market demand. So if you manage to, say you address some type of pain point for customers, and you get a very high demand for that product, a lot of people will start signing up, and once you have like a very strong sign up, you've probably an indicator that you have product market fit. Now the problem is it's not something that you can just easily measure. Now someone else said you've identified a market and you built a product that has been adopted by the majority of that market, then you probably have product market fit. Now, here's a metric. I think I found this was probably on Wikipedia, basically saying that if you survey at least 40% of your customers, say they would be very disappointed if they no longer have access to your particular product or service, then you probably have a good metric for product market fit. So basically, they, looking at if people can't live without something, that has product market fit. And it turns out that retention is probably one of the best ways to actually measure that. So if you're not losing customers, you have a sticky product, and then that's probably a good indicator that you do have some type of product market fit. So coming back to that example that we saw before with the green line, you can see there they're not losing customers. So that's probably an indicator that they do have product market fit, where the blue one is probably a bad product. It's either maybe targeted the wrong segment, or maybe their pricing's wrong, maybe their sales funnel's not set up correctly. Now, the last thing I kind of want to talk about is, what is really a startup? And like I said in the beginning, I didn't really have any idea what a startup really is, apart from a new business that's small. Probably they do a lot of funding, and everybody wants to work for one because they're a lot more fun. So looking for some definitions, basically a startup is basically a company that has a goal to grow and scale, usually quickly and usually using technology to do so. So these are the fundamental things. So if you're a startup, you basically have a growth mindset. It's all about, sort of getting the maximum growth so that you can appeal to investors. And this kind of distinguishes between, just a small business and a startup. One of the definitions I saw, that all startups by their nature will start up being small businesses, but not all small businesses are startups. Because if you're not targeting a growth mindset and trying to appeal to investment, because obviously investors are looking for the best return on interest, and so the growth is a really good decision point for them, then you're probably maybe not a startup, maybe you're just a small business, and that's actually okay. But I think that's an important decision to make. So it's sort of this whole growth mindset thing where you start maybe looking at sort of the growth over all other aspects of the business. Unfortunately, this tends to result in you making a lot of short-term gain over long-term benefit. And I don't know, I've seen a lot of startups fail. I've worked at some startups where it was all about, sort of improving their growth. I remember working for one where they were setting sales targets, and I think they had, 1 month was $50,000. Next month they looked at 100,000, then they wanted 400,000, and eventually they wanted to go up. I think that just before Christmas they wanted to target, I think 1.2 million in revenue. That company's not around anymore. Eventually, the problem with continuous growth, it becomes unsustainable. At some point where you just can't keep growing and growing and growing. And I think this is why so many startups fail. So us at Pactflow, we've been thinking, maybe we're not quite, in that startup, just continuous growth. We kind of more targeted of sustainable growth. We want to create a sustainable business. We actually think retention of customers is really important over, sort of marketing activities to increase, adoption or acquisition or awareness. But I think you need to address all those things. So that's basically the main points in the talk. We're going to open it up to questions. But it was quite a good journey for us. And we've learned a lot of things. I had no idea about, sales pipelines. I had no idea how to do pricing. I had no idea about, startups and what's it all about. And it was a really good journey for me. So Matt and Beth, I see we've got 2 questions. You guys want to jump in?
Yeah, I can start. I'll just quickly mention, I think actually I've archived one, sorry, so I probably shouldn't have done that. So Tom Hombergs, thanks for joining. Welcome to Australia as well. He asked for a link to the startup school, so I'll just post that in the channel. Hazel was asking about the complexity of the product for the user or the system. I was hoping for a bit more detail. I think you're asking about the pricing and the complexity of that.
Yeah, and the gist that I got from the answer was basically it's more like, in this case, complexity more refers to the cost of creating the product overall. Yeah.
So basically the death zone that Ron was talking about, if the product's too expensive to maintain but too cheap to sell, you're going to run out of money, or you're eventually just going to just collapse under the weight of trying to acquire and keep customers going, even though they're not paying you much. So
it's also to do with the complexity of how much effort it takes to sell.
Acquisition.
So if it's something that needs a salesperson to spend 3 months talking to a customer, even if it's a really cheap product to run, that's a high complexity of sale. The complexity kind of relates to everything about it, whether it's the product as well as selling the product.
Yeah, let me just find that slide so we can, there we go, the one. Yeah, so the enterprise, your basically your sales staff will spend a lot of time negotiating contracts and stuff. So that's why it can take it can take up to 6 months to get a sale. And I think that's why you need to have those high prices just to cover that cost.
Yeah, and I think the other angle to that is, and I posted that, there was a few channels going in, Slido versus Hangouts, but I think this is where kind of the product market fit starts to fall apart a little bit, because you may have product market fit in that you've got a really good product that people want, but if it's only sort of valued in a sort of transactional or self-serve kind of price point, but requires the effort in acquisition or sales or education up in the enterprise space, essentially you're in the high complexity but low price. So you're in that bottom right-hand corner quadrant. So you've got product market fit. They want the product is desired, but you can't make it fit with your model. So really, you might have a product model fit. It could be a channel problem. So I'll put a link in the Hangouts channel that might be worth having a look into if you're interested by that. So I think we've answered that question. I did see the order's out of date now, but how did you choose which features are open source versus commercial? Did you want to have a go at that, Beth?
Yeah, sure. So the stuff that is related to the core Pact functionality, we keep open source, and this is for quite a few reasons. We need all the open source tools that already exist to work with the other open source code. It needs buy-in from all the open source maintainers. It's a community effort, so we like to keep all the stuff that relates to all the existing Pact stuff open source. The stuff that we're making, putting in the commercial product, are things to do with using Pact and Pact Broker at scale. So the things that large groups of people need to use Pact with the right security, with the right auditing, group management, people management, all that sort of extra goodness that you need when you start to have microservices at large scale issues.
Thanks, Beth. I think the other angle to add to it as well, if I can embellish that comment. So for us, we spent a lot of time, I guess we kind of briefly touched on it at the start, but we spent a lot of time at the start of building this business and also throughout the entire process trying to work out how to get the balance right. So, Ron, Beth, and myself in particular, we've come from an open source background. We love open source. The whole reason to create this company was to do more of that and create a sustainable way of doing this sort of stuff. So we spent a lot of time thinking about how we structure our business in a way that enables us to do that while also making money. And that's obviously always going to be a balance. But probably one way of summarizing it is that we see, going back to Ron's funnel, we see open source as a really good way of opening the top of the funnel and getting adoption. So our strategy, if you will, is really just making the best open source tools we can, solving the problem. We know that's going to drive adoption, and we know that not everyone's going to give us money, but we know that if we make the adoption curve wider, we know that more people will make their way to the bottom of that funnel. And that seems to be essentially a strategy a lot of really successful open source companies do. There's a bunch of other things we need to do, obviously, to make our business successful, but largely that's how we're approaching it. And therefore, you can prioritize work based on how it's going to change that adoption curve. So if a new open source feature is going to get more people using it who maybe weren't using it before, that's going to drive more sales eventually anyway.
Ties into that, Matt, there's a question there from Erin. What's worked for you in terms of marketing and growing the Pactflow business? So I might just jump onto that one. So one of the things we realized is that the open source sort of software and the documentation site is a very good source for us. So we spend a lot of effort just to get the top of the funnel as wide as possible by trying to get the documentation, open source documentation in a better form. So Matt and Beth spent a lot of time getting that out. And so that was where one of the things we used to grow is we're looking at that awareness stage of the funnel by just getting as many people aware of Pact would eventually equate to more people aware of Pactflow.
Yep, thanks, Ron. There's another. I was just trying to go in the order we got those. I guess roadmap for the team going full time on Pactflow. How does DS feel about that one? Anyone want to pick that one up? Or do you have a crack?
Well, I think my intent all along is to be able to work on software that I love on a full time basis. So definitely. Our roadmap is we first needed to make a sustainable business in the sense that it could run by itself. We've done that. So at the moment, we're getting more revenue than a cost to run. So that was our first milestone. But yeah, at some point, we need to be able to pay staff. So I guess that would be our next goal is to get into a point where we can actually start paying salaries. and getting staff to work on this stuff.
Yep. I think Tom, I'll just mark that one as closed. I think Tom was asking about prioritizing features and feature requests. I suppose in a way we've kind of half answered that, but then there's the other angle to it, which is now you've got people actually asking for features and feature requests. Do one of you want to have a try at that one?
Yeah, well, overall, we set 3 monthly OKRs, and for the commercial stuff, we pick the features that are going to support meeting those goals. For the open source stuff, that's now kind of being brought along, as in the past, we've just kind of picked up what we thought was what our gut feel told us people were most interested in. But now we have the OKRs for Pactflow. We're also picking up work that supports that, as well as using the wonderful new Canny, which is the feature request prioritization software. We got a free account, which is wonderful, and that's really helping us work out what people are most interested in and what to pick up next, and also helps us and make that announcement when things are ready, so people know that stuff has come out, which is something we've been pretty poor about in the past, is actually letting people know when new features have come out.
Kurt's got a similar question around how do you manage and prioritize competing requests from various customers and competing requests from existing versus prospects. And I think that kind of ties in with the open source versus commercial and what we just talked about. I think maybe if I can make one quick comment, I think having our open source goals tied in with our commercial goals, having those separate to begin with was probably a failing on our part, just in terms of we felt like we were focusing on the commercial business and at the expense of the open source. And I think once we integrated those two things together, we felt like things were more better tied together, and actually really everything was working toward that vision. So I think the first step was really just recognizing what the problems we were trying to solve and the vision we were trying to create. And that kind of naturally meant that prioritizing those features aligned a bit better with that strategy.
Yeah, the success or failure of Pactflow as a business depends so much on the success or failure of all the open source code. So it's now in the interest of all the Pactflow people to make sure that the open source code is as good as it can be.
Yep. But it's fair to say, Kurt, as well as others, particularly now, obviously during sort of the COVID situation, making sure we're trying to focus on getting cash flow and paying customers, that has to be a bit of a short-term priority just to make sure we sort of get through this time. So, we've recently done some work, sort of consulting-like work to build out, for example, our C++ interface. That's been a somewhat partially funded exercise. So there's things like that we need to do just to sort of, I guess, make sure the business will continue to be successful after this, I guess, pretty difficult moment. Just trying to look the upvotes here. What came next? So that was Kurt. So I'll just mark that one as done. Anonymous. How about we pick up there's one at the bottom actually, which is kind of interesting. I didn't quite get the question. So how large is your active contributor base in the open source community, and how did we grow it?
That is a very interesting question. I'd say less than the main contributors that keep the whole operation going, probably less than 10. We know it's one of the things that we need to work on, is to get more people involved, to build up people's confidence so they can start contributing. It's probably been one of the weakest points of the work we've done over the last few years, is that it becomes just so much easier to do it yourself than to get other people involved and teach them how to do it. So that's something we need to do better. We definitely need to do better. We've started focusing more on that over the last few months.
Yep. It's Beth. We'll take from the top because that's actually been voted for. So how did you build alignment around purpose or mission? Have a crack? I can go. Actually, I think Ron wants to answer this one though. It's tough, I suppose, is the main question. Like, I think, so the short answer is it's a piece of work that's always ongoing. we meet weekly as a group, with the directors and the founders and others as well, just to make sure we're just constantly tuning all of that. And to be honest, there's always going to be different sort of internal opinions about what should be the priority and so on. So I think it's kind of like anything, but I think it's really, we did build the company based on some philosophical views about open source and being open and transparent and wanting to create a sustainable business and wanting to solve problems. So I think we're really lucky to have that foundation, and we're lucky to have a pretty, as you can see in this kind of forum, a pretty open group. Doesn't mean we don't have disagreements about all kinds of things, but I think really just getting together, constantly communicating and constantly trying to think about what it is that we're trying to do helps us get there. I'm not sure if I can answer any better than that.
Yeah, it's been pretty organic because we've all worked together for like the last 5 or more years, and we kind of already knew that we were all heading in the same direction before we started it. So yeah, like Matt says, we don't agree on absolutely everything all the time, but the overall goal we were kind of all pretty much aligned on before we started the company.
Yep. Just looking for time. So 1:15. Are you getting swamped with contact us / enterprises deals? I wouldn't say swamped is the word, but we're certainly getting a lot more attention around those bigger companies and enterprise sales at the moment. We're obviously talking about, we're almost about to release our first version of an on-premise version of Pactflow as well. A lot of companies, particularly in the financial services space, are really interested in that kind of model. But certainly it's an area of the business we're focused more on as well, and we're getting having a lot more conversations around that. So, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say there was one of the big lessons we learned when it came to customer segment. Like I had that slide saying that we thought we were going to be targeting small businesses and startups. Turns out the majority of our sort of customers are actually larger enterprise. And it's probably because it's more difficult for them to self-host things. It's easier for them to get the budget to use another product. So we actually had to kind of pivot on that, earlier on and start, looking at those type of features that they would like an audit trail for security, single sign-on, things like that. So that was a big eye-opener.
Yep. I think maybe just a quick comment to go with that, just conscious of time as well. I guess shout out to Pete Cohen, who's a big fan of the business model canvas, but we've used that to probably great effect. We've had a couple of really good sessions. Actually, that's probably a good one with the alignment. I think we had a really good session, particularly I think it was December last year or thereabouts, maybe November, where we had a few sort of aha moments as a business around a whiteboard, basically re-sketching out the different various parts of the business using a BMC. And that wasn't the first time we did it, but I think just constantly going back to that business model canvas and reviewing the various parts of our business and how it operates has been really important, to make sure we're not flogging a dead horse, so to speak, but also to make sure we're aligned about what's important to the business and maybe what's not a focus anymore. I might do 1 or 2 more questions. I think we'll wrap up, and I'm just conscious of time. I guess 2 more questions. BMC for the win. Are you looking for fundraising, growing the team, etc.? I think the short answer is yes for that. That's actually is the plan for a little bit later this year. No need to elaborate on that too much, probably. I think this is a good one to end on. Do you feel the exposure of popularity to the popularity of microservices is declining?
Yeah, at some point, people are probably going to be doing less microservices because there's a cost to doing that, and we're past that initial spike in the curve of the popularity curve. But we do target other sort of not just microservices, so message queues, asynchronous, even using testing with Lambda functions and stuff like that. So I don't think we're tied specifically to microservices. I think we're more tied to anything where there's distributed systems needing to do contract testing. So I think we're okay today.
Yeah, Pact was created because of the boom in microservices, but it's not like if everybody went back to monoliths, there wouldn't be integration points anymore. Like the market, if we're talking about the feasibility of the business, even if you took away all the microservices in the entire world, the market for just integrations between monoliths is still stupendously large.
Yeah, and even I think the word microservices, maybe that's going in decline itself, but the concept is still there, and in distributed systems. So we're seeing, if anything, we're seeing more stuff. We're seeing gRPC, protobus, WebSockets, GraphQL, all the different formats over the wire. That we're just seeing more tools and technologies needing to be integrated, and the same sorts of problems that microservices had in the first place. So I'm conscious of time. It's 1:30 p.m. and it's probably quite late for some others there. I guess now's a good time to wrap up and say thank you for everyone coming along. I can see a few people have dropped off already, but if there are more questions, I think there'll be a follow-up after this, and you better catch us on a whole bunch of different places. Ron, Beth, and myself, there's some contact details for us there. There's also our Slack channel, slack.pact.io. Come and join us if you want to have a chat there. And I think the session has been recorded, so we might send it out as well. So if Erin or Leanne wanted to sign off, if not, otherwise we'll say thanks very much and hope to talk to you soon.